Okay, and it's 4 o'clock. So, hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Vocabulary Development Within and Beyond Decodable Readers. My name is Kate McGough. I'm Head of Primary Publishing, and my colleague sitting next to me is Jessica Nudia, Primary Associate Marketing Manager. So, I'm just going to go to some housekeeping. Jacinta, if you could bump along a slide. Actually, first, yep, there we are. Thank you. So this session is being recorded and the recording will be sent out to all who registered within the week. So the Q&A and the chat are open for questions or comments, so please engage and feel free to use it. If we run out of Q&A time, a member of staff will be in touch with an answer to your question, or it will be addressed through email. So please reach out to our email address there, and I think we can pop that in the chat as well for you. So I now would like to introduce our wonderful presenter. So here she is. So I'd like to introduce Jacinta Conway. So she's an educational and literacy consultant with over 2 decades of experience helping schools and educators turn research into classroom results. Jacinta's expertise in curriculum and assessment design, particularly in literacy, is matched by her ability to translate evidence-based strategies into practical, impactful teaching. She works with educators to learn, lead, and launch, building skills, confidence, and results in every classroom she supports. And today, Jacinta will share how to implement evidence-based vocabulary instruction using both explicit and implicit strategies for all students, including students with English as an additional language and low language learners. This is the third of her series of 3 webinars, and we're so excited to welcome Jacinta.
Thank you so much, Kate and Jess. That was a beautiful introduction. Welcome, everybody. We will start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country where we are meeting today. This webinar is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal elders and anyone else who happens to be here in attendance today. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. The goal of today is to strengthen your understanding of explicit vocabulary instruction and how it supports both reading comprehension and the quality of children's writing within and beyond the use of decodable texts. There's 5 areas I want to cover today. First, we want to look at where vocabulary development fits into the reading and writing models that I've presented in the last 2 webinars, and just to see where it fits in the big picture, and then look at looking at opportunities to select words from tier 2 and 3 vocab for explicit instruction. We're going to look at ways to embed vocabulary learning in reading, writing, and oral language tasks. And then we're going to look at more specifically how to scaffold vocabulary instruction for English as an additional language and low language learners. And all of this, hopefully you'll be able to take away some practical strategies that you'll be able to use as part of your daily literacy instruction and your literacy block. Okay, so we'll get started with background knowledge, and we'll keep continuing to build our background knowledge and how vocabulary connects with the simple view of reading and the writing route. So each webinar I have presented this model of the simple view of reading, and we know that the outcome of reading is comprehension, so we need to have decoding and language comprehension to equal reading comprehension. In addition to this, we've also looked at Scarborough's reading rope, where the reading decoding, here we've got our word recognition, is broken down into phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, and also language comprehension, where you can see here, we've explored this quite a bit over the last few webinars with that background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, reasoning, and literary knowledge. We know that all of this needs to come together in order to have skilled reading. You can see vocabulary is specifically labelled here, and we've got the terms breadth and precision. I'll be using the words breadth and depth a little bit today. I'm going to also now bring in another model This is the Cognitive Foundations Framework, and it's developed by Tumner and Hoover, and it builds on the simple view of reading. And what you'll find is, if you just quickly bump back here and have a look at the reading rope, it aligns quite nicely with the reading rope, but it's got a different function. Okay, so we have reading comprehension at the top here. And then underneath that, we've got our word recognition on the right and language comprehension on the left. And then if we unpack word recognition a little bit more, we've got the alphabetic coding skills, concepts about print, which is essential, knowledge of the alphabetic principle. Remember that the alphabetic principle is that letters represent sounds, and the principle is also that there are rules that govern where the sounds go. We've got to have our letter knowledge and phonemic awareness. On the other side, when we have language comprehension, we have actually, I'll do over the background knowledge and inferencing skills, which you can see overlaps these layers here of linguistic knowledge, phonological knowledge, like distinguishing here from phonemic awareness, even though they are linked and aligned. Syntactic knowledge, which is our sentence construction and how we sequence words and to make sense, and semantic knowledge. So in terms of vocabulary would sit in the semantic place here. And the reason I'm bringing this up today is to add on to the previous models that I've shown. And the whole purpose of this model is to support us to make good decisions when we make assessments and we assess students' learning in reading, writing, speaking, and listening about where there may be gaps and where we may need to intervene. So if you notice that someone has difficulty with words and semantic here, it gives you a sense of, okay, there's a difficulty with semantic and word knowledge here. That's really going to affect comprehension. I need to explore and potentially support interventions so that the child can continue to learn. So again, vocabulary sits in the semantic knowledge here, which is part of that linguistic language comprehension. And what we know is that vocabulary acts as the bridge between word recognition and comprehension. So students who have strong vocabulary knowledge, they can make meaning of a word at a word and a sentence level, and they're able to draw inferences and connect new information to what they already know. Good vocabulary means they can also transfer their understanding across reading and writing tasks. So vocabulary development isn't just about, all these little learning definitions, it's strengthening comprehension and expression across all areas of literacy. That's the added on foundations framework. Reviewing our writing, simple view of writing and the writing route, we know that transcription skills multiplied by ideation gives us our written composition, which links to syntax, text structure, and writing craft, which you can see on this side with the writing rope. Specifically for vocabulary in the writing rope, you would be looking at word choice in writing craft. So you would also have it in the automaticity of transcription skills, because you need it to be automatic so that you can then use it. So that's a little bit of background with the models. I'm going to go back a little further now and just acknowledge the research. So the three big papers that have got a lot of recognition in the space of science of reading community and where it sits is that in America in 2000, they published the National Reading Panel, the US panel. There was about a 400-page report where they analysed over I think 150,000 papers. And within that, vocabulary was one of the key indicators and critical factors for the support of reading comprehension. Australia did their report in 2005 and analysed about 1,500 papers with their meta-analysis in the National Inquiry into the Teaching of Literacy. And the Rose report in 2006 from the UK also confirmed the same outcomes, that these 5 pillars phonemic awareness, systematic phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension are all needed to be able to read efficiently and effectively. So when we talk about vocabulary, we're not talking about it as an individual component necessarily. It links with all other components, but it was definitely highlighted as being a critical component for reading. This table is from the American Association, the American Speech and Language and Hearing Association. I've got a little link here if you want to. I've summarised it and put it together here, but it looks at speech and language development. So we've got age range here, receptive language here is our ability to comprehend, and expressive language over here for what children and young babies are able to do. So we can see for receptive that they can turn to sounds, recognise voices. Moving into 6 to 12 months, they respond to their name. They may be able to understand no. By 18 months, you want them to be able to follow a one-step instruction. And then by 2 years, you want them to be able to follow a two-step instruction. Go put on your shoes and get your bag, for example. By 3 years, you want them to be able to understand the what and the which words. They certainly know how to use why, I think, at this age. And then by 3 to 4, you're looking at location words. And by 5 years old, time words. So you're thinking about your time words there. A lot of them are like the befores, afters, and location words are on, off, up, down. They're your prepositions, and these can often be your conjunctions and adverbials. In expressive, we've got that they can babble at around 6 to 12 months, use gestures and some words at 18 months. By 2 years, you want them to have around 50 words in the bank with some two-word combinations. By 3, you see here we've got some plurals and some ing, ed. So we're heading into morphology and getting a grasp and understanding of when to add ing onto words. They'll start playing around with ed. They'll get it right, or they may not get it right, like rund, for example. And then they're starting to tell us simple stories. And by the time they get to school, you would like them to be able to coherently give you some sort of recount. Anyone who does duty in a foundation playground will be able to sort out who needs more support than not when they're trying to retell what just happened when they get into some sort of conflict. So that gives you a bit of background about vocabulary and what children come to school with, just as a snapshot view. As far as research, one of the questions that I got from, or that Kate, thank you, you brought up with me earlier, was quite often the questions that you get after a webinar is, what was the book that Jacinta mentioned on that slide? So I'm putting 6 books up here on this slide for now so that you can see them, and I'm going to put them up again at the end. But essentially, I've used all of these books for the 3 series. The 2 new ones that I'm bringing in for this one on vocabulary, Bringing Words to Life is really one of the key books for vocabulary instruction. Teach Like a Champion, the Science of Reading, and Explicit Direct Instruction for English Learners. This is the blue book, not the purple book, which I think is a bit more popular. Okay, research wrap-up. Vocabulary instruction needs to go beyond word lists and definitions. It needs to foster the development of morphology, sentence structure, and cohesive devices, helping students construct meaning through complex noun phrases, descriptive clauses, and verb tenses. This kind of instruction strengthens not only comprehension, but also writing, because as students expand their word and sentence level knowledge, they gain the tools to be able to write in more sophisticated ways. As Steve Graham highlights in his book on best practices in writing instruction, he states that developing vocabulary and syntax is essential for growth in all types of writing and text types. And so without that development, written expression becomes increasingly more difficult the further up you go through school. So we need to plan our vocabulary instruction. And so we have to have a look at how we plan it. But before we do this, I thought I would bring in a bit of additional interactive engagement in this session. And I've put together a Menti meter, and there's a code here on your screen. So if you can have a look at this code here, I've started a Menti meter and I've opened it up for you. So all you need to do is get your phone out, put your phone onto the QR code, and you should go straight into the Mentimeter, which is open now. So I will present it while you're having a look at that. And I'm going to go out now and go into present my screen, which will take me just a sec, and then click present. Okay, so hopefully you've got this. All right, so a couple of quick questions. We've reached the end of my presentation. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Let's do a pre-assessment. Where are you now? And the goal of this is to sort of activate your prior knowledge and encourage you to self-monitor and self-assess your own practice with vocabulary instruction. So which of these best describes your current approach to teaching new words? Is it 1, incidental, where as they appear, or is it 2, partially planned, tier or topic-based words, or 3, I've got this, fully explicit, I'm all over this, and I present with vocabulary as part of my everyday practice? I can honestly say when I was a classroom teacher, I was probably more in the first 5 years of my teaching around the 1. Then I moved into the 2 space, and I'll give you an example coming up. And I'm now in the 3 space, but it's taken a long time for me to get there. And after doing all the research on this, again, I feel more confident, but I can understand where we're all at different spaces. Great. All right, that's the first question. The next question is, rate your confidence in explicitly teaching vocabulary. So not really confident. I just sort of ask questions as I go. Emerging confidence, I've got an idea and I know the value of it. If I go 3 with emerging confidence, it might be, yeah, I plan my vocabulary. And 5, yeah, we've got a vocabulary instruction already mapped into our curriculum, and we've got a whole scope and sequence within the school, and we know how to implement. Great. So we've got a range. This is good. Thank you. All right, next question. This is a short answer. So how do you assess students' vocabulary knowledge formally and informally? So you might like to just type onto your phone for this one if you've got something that you already do to assess vocab. Some people might use one of the PAT. If you do PAT testing, you might do the vocabulary one. Some people might use informal vocabulary assessments, pre and post. Great. Lots of informally. PAT B, PAT DAL. Check for understanding quizzes. Yep. Match the word to meaning. Yes, I do that as well. I like that one. Oral responses. Yeah, sometimes even the fingers up. I wish I could say I do. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. All right, lots of informal. I'll be presenting a lot of informal today as well. I think it's the way it goes. There are some formal assessments. The PAT, yeah, there are some formal vocabulary assessments, but I think we're best doing formative assessment for vocabulary because it's something that we continue to build. If we've got it in our planning and we plan for it, we know we'll be hitting the mark. Okay, I'll pause it here and we'll come back to this for the post assessment, and I'll take us back to the presentation. All right, let me do my portion of the screen. Okay, cool. sometimes this, oh, I'm good. Okay. Vocabulary. Why vocabulary can't be left to chance. So these are the two books that I've sort of used as my baseline for the next bank of information that I'm sharing with you. Okay, so vocab can't really be left to chance. It's the gatekeeper to comprehension, writing quality, and ultimately curriculum access. We often assume that students will just pick it up, that they'll pick up words through exposure, but the research is really clear on this, that they don't. And especially for students with language poor environments or EAL backgrounds, vocabulary growth requires explicit instruction. Beck McCowan and Kukin's Bringing Words to Life reframed vocabulary teaching as something that really needs to be deliberate, deep, and connected across the curriculum, so not incidental. And this aligns with what Lemov's book says around vocabulary as well. There's a chapter in this book called Vocabulary Reconsidered, and he acknowledges in this chapter all the work of Bringing Words to Life as they've based their planning of vocabulary instruction in this book on Bringing Words to Life, robust vocabulary. So it's all really about having a shared language as well. So I want to review now with you the 3 tiers of vocabulary. So tier 1 vocabulary is essentially everyday words that most students know. For example, book, happy, run, and they're usually incidental words. And it's assumed a lot of the time that these words are known and understood. Tier 2 words are our high utility academic words that we use across contexts. So you can see the examples here: analyze, fortunate, or maintain. And these are the ones that we explicitly teach. And tier 3, we have domain-specific technical terms. So already in this webinar, I've used terms like phonemic awareness, phonological, semantics. We know that that's tier 3 domain-specific language. Okay. So the core principles from this book are, there are 6 of them. Select conceptually rich words, not just topic words, but words that students can apply across concepts or contexts. Provide student-friendly meanings. So not just a definition from the dictionary, because quite often the dictionary definitions don't provide appropriate student-friendly context. Encourage active engagement once you're presenting and modelling explicit vocabulary through discussion, comparison with other words, or examples that require more thinking. Promote deep processing and connections, so linking new words to their prior knowledge. Revisiting words in new contexts, so continually reviewing words. And also integrating vocabulary across reading, writing, and speech. So once we've got these 6 principles, let's look at these 6 principles when we're curriculum planning. In Lemov's book on Teach Like a Champion reading, unpacking vocabulary instruction, states map tier 2 and 3 words directly from the curriculum content descriptors and also from your mentor text. So you've got to read your text, your mentor text, and determine which words you want to explicitly teach. You need to build your vocabulary sets for each term. So for example, you might have 8 to 10 tier 2 words, reuse and potentially across subjects. You want to incorporate word learning routines. And these routines need to be designed into your literacy block. So it could be a do now activity, could be part of your daily review with your vocabulary, and it could be part of your writing warm-ups. You'll want to use visuals and you'll want to make links to morphology. So linking prefixes, suffixes, and word roots to build more connections. And you also want to assess through application. So we can do those check for understanding questions, which I noticed that someone mentioned earlier, like matching vocabs to their word definitions. And we are assessing if they can do that. But ultimately, if they're using the words when they write and when they speak, we know that they're generalizing their vocabulary, which is why that discussion is so important. I'm going to give you a couple of different examples of embedded curriculum planning here. You can see there's a link on the screen here. This is an old document, but it's still one of my favourite documents for collecting or teaching mathematical vocabulary. So it's maths vocab. This is probably printed around the early 2000s, and I'm just showing you one page. If I can I'm going to zoom in here a bit. So this is a page from year 1, and we're looking here at the maths vocab on time. And you can see all the time words that have been presented here, and some of them are in red. So any of the words here that are in blue in this book have already been introduced in reception or foundation year. Any of the words in red are new words introduced. And this vocabulary was a big push as part of their explicit instructional model in the early 2000s in London when I was teaching there. And this was just a core book that you would use. And it was important that when you were teaching, if you were teaching time, you had to have the time vocabulary up and you had to refer to it and explicitly teach new terms as they came up. You can still access this as a PDF. And I think it's a great tool to use for explicit instruction in vocabulary along with your mathematics curriculum. So that's an example of how you can map it out. And what I really love about it is that each year group, all the new words are in red. So it's really easy for you, no matter what year group you're in, to see what words that you need to teach. In addition to this, I'm going to show you a Tier 3 intervention. So this is a Tier 3 intervention that I've used called Anita Archer, who's quite well known for her explicit instruction. It's called Rewards. And part of the program, as far as reading intervention, it has a component on vocabulary. And the vocabulary instruction matches exactly what we talked about here, where you select the words, you put them in student-friendly definitions, you encourage engagement, and then you revisit and then you also assess. So I will show you an example here. The word is astonishes, and you can see that there's an explanation and it says, if someone or something astonishes you, they surprise you very much. It then gives you a synonym with amazes and surprises. You then get an example. Every time I drive by this tulip field, the colour of the tulips astonishes me. You then have a check for understanding question. Robin is reading an adventure story. What astonishes Robin? And then it says, begin by saying, and they give you the sentence stem. This is so important to give the sentence stem so that when you're asking the children to respond, they are always responding in complete sentences. Okay, so this program is probably just over 10 years old. I think it could even be more than that. So it just goes to show what materials have been around and how much it's already aligned with what was already published in the 2000 National Reading Panel on how to teach explicit vocab instruction. From here, we then have our word family. So we've got astonishes as a verb, astonished, astonishing, not as a verb, not an ing word as a verb here, but as an adjective, and then astonishment as a noun. So this here then popped into context with a visual, acknowledges the use of visuals and morphological links. Once these components have been done for the word, the next word is introduced, and usually there's about 4 words per lesson. And once that's done, you then do a review. I'm thinking of a word, you'll give the definition and they've got to hold up with fingers what they think the answer is. So to stop someone from taking part in an activity, they would have to go to exclude. So that's your review. And then you have a cumulative review, which means you're reviewing prior vocab that's come in. So I'm showing you this because I think it's a really good example of a vocabulary sequence that you could pick up and reapply to any classroom practice with any word, anywhere, anytime. And it also aligns with what's in this book and also what's in the Guide to the Science of Reading at a Tier 3 level. But we really want this to be at Tier 1. So let's have a look at it at the Tier 1 level. Okay, so we're now moving into what I'm going to call explicit vocabulary instruction compared to implicit vocabulary instruction, which is coming up next. So we know vocabulary instruction is not best acquired through incidental exposure or guessing from context. So the old context clues method, often where we ask students to infer meanings from, like, here's the word, go back, read around the text and tell me what you think this word might mean. And we know we have to do that, and we often get assessed in reading tests to do that. However, if that's our first point of call when we're teaching explicitly, it's not the most efficient. So research shows that this actually leads to incomplete and incorrect definitions. So students can walk away confused, or maybe with only partial understanding rather than full understanding of the vocab that you want them to know. Instead, research says that vocabulary should be taught and treated as knowledge that needs to be taught and learned, not something that you've sort of got to work out for yourself or a skill that you need to discover. So our goal as teachers is to make the meaning clear and efficient from the outset, and then invest time instead of trying to get them to work out what the word is. Instead of doing that, we want to ask them questions to apply knowledge and understanding of the word. So I'm going to show you an example of how guessing from context can be misleading. Let me give you a non-example. This is a short passage that comes from a text as an example from the book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle. So I'm going to read it like I'd be reading it. Why? It's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it even has butter in it. I told you he would bring it. Ralph could not help boasting, even though his mouth was still full. After enjoying his feast, he shared some with his squeaky little brothers. Now imagine the teacher has been reading this and then stops at this point and asks the question, what do you think boasting means? So in the example of context here, the student who was being taught replied, it means eating with your mouth full. So you can see how boasting could come in this context. That's quite logical to say, because if I read around it, it looks like boasting could mean that. So that if that's where we're starting, and they say, if a child says that and then another child gives another answer, another child gives another answer, I've always believed that's really valuable discussion. However, I can also acknowledge that it can really take your lesson on different pathways and sometimes mean that you go off topic and don't actually get back to the word that you're trying to teach. So instead of asking what they think the word means, you can say, boasting means talking too much with pride about what you have or what you can do. And then you can ask a question to say, so why do you think Ralph was boasting here? And then you're telling them the definition, then you're asking them to think about why the character was doing this. You're taking it to another level of thinking, which is beyond just knowledge and remembering. There's an application and inferring that needs to go on here, which means that you can really push vocabulary instruction to a deeper level when you provide them with the definition quickly and move on. Okay, how about in decodables? So I'm going to look at this book, The Ship in the Fog, and I just wanted to point out that I've probably used this book a few times, and the reason I'm using this book again today, and I'm just going to keep it the same the whole way through, is because when you're teaching all different strategies for vocabulary, I don't want to change my content too much so that we can distinguish the differences in instructional strategies when teaching vocabulary. So some of the instructions that I'm going to give and examples I may not use with the ship in the fog, because this is about end of year foundation or sometime early in year one, as far as the scope and sequence goes. You can see at the back of the decodable, you've got extending vocabulary, and there's clams, ship, and phone added in here for vocabulary. It hasn't got the word fog, but I'm going to focus in on the word fog because that's what the story is about. Another reason why I've chosen this text is because this text has a complication, and quite often with our early decodable readers, there may not be a complication in the narrative, which they don't always need, but it is good when you've got a complication. All right, so let's have a look at how we could teach this. We want to have a routine here where you will notice that we've got the word, the definition, the related parts of speech, some situations or worked examples, and an image. So here we have the word fog, and here is the definition. Here is fog can be a noun. We can also use the word mist, and an adjective could be foggy. And then there are two sentences to give an example and an image to prompt further knowledge and understanding. So fog is a thick cloud of tiny water drops that forms near the ground and makes it hard to see. We then show examples like foggy morning and links to misty or hazy. The same with clams. We've got the word clams here. We've got a picture of what clams are. And then we'll say clams are sea animals with two hard shells that live in the sand or mud and can be eaten as food. And you may even show them that the clams can open and close. You might say singular noun is clam, plural is clams. And then you might bring in the word clammy to sort of extend the vocabulary beyond the breadth of the word, and we're moving into depth here. So checking in, we've got a clear student-friendly definition from the outset. We've got a short explanation of the word in context. We've got an opportunity for students to apply the word in context here. And finally, we've also, not yet, but we will add in now, repetition and reinforcement over time. And for the purpose of teaching an explicit teaching of vocabulary, to see how far you can go, imagine the context here is that this decodable reader is being used and read repeatedly over 3 or 4 days to develop decoding and fluency, and questions can then be provided to develop the depth of knowledge with this word. I wouldn't necessarily in the early years present a table like this to children in the early years, and so I've just shown you a little worked example. I do want, when I'm explicitly teaching a word, for the children to have an opportunity to write things down. And I'm demonstrating here writing the word in their workbooks, because if you want them to have a record of the vocabulary that they've learned over time, I probably wouldn't use a whiteboard for this, because I want them to, if it's a word that I want them to know, it's really nice to see a record of vocabulary building up over time. And you can see all I've done here is I've written the definition, given a sentence, and then this is the student-friendly, or the students made up their own sentence, and then they've drawn a picture as an example. All right, moving beyond the baseline here of teaching and explicit teaching, I then want to move into active practice questions, and I want to also be able to model answers. So the more types of questions I ask as I repeat and come back to this and ask repeated questions, I'm going to ask more complex questions to really develop that depth of word knowledge and understanding as we read over the coming days. So I might ask a question like, when might it be dangerous to drive in fog? Think of that when word again, so we're getting the time in. And I might even model and say it could be dangerous to drive in fog because it's hard to see other cars and traffic lights. And I'm sure there'll be children who can give examples. of being in this situation. I may ask them to finish the sentence. The fog began to lift when. So you can see I'm using the word when again, which means I'm prompting them to use complex sentences in their answers. When the sun came out and warmed the air. How might someone feel walking through thick fog alone? Now I'm getting them to tap into their emotional intelligence because they've got to think about thoughts and feelings around the atmosphere and tone that having fog in a scene might bring. They might feel nervous or unsure because they can't see what's around them. Imagine you're writing a story. How could you use fog to create a mood or setting? So I could use fog to make the scene feel mysterious, like something secret is about to happen. I'm thinking Halloween here. And then finally, as a challenge, explain how fog can change the way people move or behave. So there's layers of questions that we can design as part of our questions and answers. And in fact, going back to when we would do this in vocabulary, our do nows or our daily reviews, to prompt discussion and depth of knowledge of vocabulary. Okay, similarly, we can do the same thing with clams. Where might you find clams and how would you collect them? Finish the sentence. The family collected clams because. What might happen if the tide comes in while you are digging for clams? Or how could a person clam up? What does that mean? And when we go into questions like this one, we're moving into social and pragmatic language as well, where we're asking them to problem solve behaviour, and as well as looking at being flexible with vocabulary and looking at it from lots of different angles rather than just what is a clam and where would you find a clam? And then a challenge being to use both clammy and clams in one sentence. So planning this ahead of time enables you to develop this depth and rich discussion around words that you otherwise, I don't believe, are able to do, because the alternative is you're reading and you stop and you ask, what do you think this word means? You may get some great answers, but you're not going to get the same depth that you would if you planned explicit vocabulary routines in this way. Okay, that's explicit. We're now moving into implicit. I'm just looking at my time. It's 4:40. We've got about 5-10 minutes to go. So implicit vocabulary instruction has its place where it enhances students' understanding of text and draws attention to new and unfamiliar words as they read. You cannot explicitly teach every word, and we know we need to get about at least 10 words in a day. So 3 to 4 words is achievable to teach explicitly, or even 2 to 3 for depth of vocabulary. The rest we're going to do implicitly. Okay, so this approach also supports the development of broad and varied vocabulary. I'm going to show you 5 ways to do implicit vocabulary instruction here. Number 1 is define and move on. Number 2 is define and pronounce and do a bit of call and response. Number 3 is define and with a picture. Number 4 is define and write down. And number 5 is define and apply. And each one of these, I've still used the word fog, and I'll give you some examples and the purpose for each one here. Number 1, define and move on. Teacher says, fog means a thick cloud near the ground that makes it hard to see. Let's keep reading. And then you just move on. So you've given them a little bit of context, but day 1, the goal is to decode. So our goal here is you give them the definition and it's enough for them to comprehend and let them move on. Now, many children will already know what fog is, but not in every context. I live near the beach. I know lots of people who come to the beach near where I live in summer, and they see the beach at certain times of the year, at certain times of the day, and then that's it. I live near the beach and see it every single day. I get a lot more different context for how nature can change on a daily basis near the beach. And we have to be able to know our students and know what their knowledge and background knowledge is to determine how much information you're going to give on FOG. That short definition that I just used there may just be for the 1 or 2 children in the class who need it, and the rest may already have it. Number 2 is define and pronounce. So you would say, this word is FOG. Say FOG. They say FOG. And then you say, it means, and you give them the definition. So you're recognizing it, you're getting them to pronounce the word, and this is really helpful for EAL students while still providing simple meaning. It reinforces decoding and oral accuracy, which they should be okay with this word. Number 3, we've got define and picture. So the teacher is this time going to show an image and say, this is fog. Can you see how it's harder to see the trees behind at the back of the water here? I might not use this example. And the whole goal here is to support deeper understanding of concrete nouns to help students have meaningful imagery and context. Number 4 is define and jot. So you give them the definition and then you tell the students, write that definition next to the word in your book. So I wouldn't be asking my little year oneers to do this in their decodable, but I may be using this strategy for my 2s, 3s, 4s, or 5s or 6s, depending on the context of the text that they're reading. It also strengthens their spelling, their orthographic mapping, and their memory by linking the word definition and spelling. So this is a very useful strategy to use. It's quick and it doesn't take the same amount of time as explicit vocabulary instruction, but it certainly ups their knowledge and understanding of vocabulary. And finally, number 5 is define and apply. So you give them the definition and then you ask a question. Why might it be hard for a ship to sail in the fog? Or how would you feel walking through the fog? So this supports comprehension and application, prompting students to use the new word straight away in context. And again, that will support their knowledge of that word in long-term memory. Okay, they're the 5 implicit vocabulary instruction. The last part that I wanted to present is going further and looking at what else do we need to know and understand for teaching vocabulary to students with English as an additional language or low language learners. For that, I got information from EDI for English learners. Essentially, what this book says is what all the other books already say. So if you're already doing an explicit vocabulary instruction, you'll be doing almost everything that's recommended in this book. It says, but what we do need to know about EAL learners is they often know fewer words overall and they have a smaller semantic network. So that means they may know the word run, but they may not know that term as in how to run a business or how to score a run in cricket. So they need more opportunities. They will struggle to understand words across these contexts, and they do need explicit instruction, which is the same as every other learner. Just as a review, who are our EAL learners? For those who may need to know this, it's students who are developing English alongside another language. They may have strong skills in their first language, but limited English. Their progress really does depend on vocabulary depth, exposure and explicit teaching, and their oral language and background knowledge are critical foundations here for them to comprehend effectively at their typically developing level. We know EAL learners face a dual learning load, that they have to learn curriculum content as well as English language structures. And vocabulary for them is the biggest barrier for comprehension and achievement. So the solution is effective explicit teaching of vocabulary and language across content lessons. I'm bringing back this table here just to remind you of the 5 years of language that's been developed for English language speakers that are not EAL, and how much catch up is necessary for students who have EAL as a background here, and how that can contribute to their vocabulary gap. So we can test for this, and standardised tests do often tell us about vocabulary. but it can sometimes miss the vocabulary growth that we need to know and understand about EAL learners. Even knowledge of tier 1 words, which we mentioned earlier from robust vocabulary. Now that's based on being an English speaker. But if you're not an English speaker, a lot of these tier 1 words will need more explicit instruction. So those everyday words will need more work, especially when we come to verb tenses and regular and irregular verbs. For example, they will need more work. The answer and solution is the same, explicit instruction in vocabulary. Really, the more prefixes and suffixes you can bring into your vocab instruction, the more all learners will benefit from this. Having our sentence level scaffolds, because but so has become almost everyday language now for teachers as usage of a sentence scaffold. Today, I'm going to show you a few different sentence scaffolds that I think are really useful for really drawing out vocab depth beyond the standard because but so's. We know you need to pre-teach vocabulary for English language learners. Gestures are very helpful to remember terms and providing real life examples. And you've got to model as much modelling that you can do and modelling academic talk in discussions so that students become used to using academic talk in the classroom. Think pair shares. And we know we need multiple exposures. The big takeaway from this book for me that I thought was really worth sharing is encouraging the use of first language for brainstorming and concept transfer. So not saying we're doing English here, not to speak your language. They do need opportunities to write in their own language so they can transfer across. And I'm going to raise high frequency words for vocabulary as well, because we know we need to teach them. We know that students need it. They are the glue that provides automaticity and fluency in word reading because they're the most used words. And we also know that most of them are quite irregular. So I wanted to just point out, I've got 100 words here of high frequency words. And on the next slide here, I've reorganized them into their parts of speech, just to highlight the complexity of the 100 most frequent words. Look how many are nouns. There's really not that many out of the 100. We've got a lot of verbs, but I've split the verbs into action and quite easy to understand verbs compared to linking and helping verbs, which are much harder to learn. And anyone who works with EAL learners would know that vocabulary-wise, these take more work. So is present tense and was would be the past tense for is. He is learning, he was learning. Or were would be plural pronoun, like we were doing the work instead of I was doing the work. So all of that takes much more work to know and understand, and we can't just assume at the tier 1 level that these are automatic and maybe just need to be learnt for spelling. It's much more helpful if you're bringing in these words to select which ones you think may need more work for teaching. The book for EAL learners mentions that it's recommended 2 to 3 words a day in foundation to grade 3. Grade 3 to 5, we've got 3 to 4 words, 3 to 6 words in years 6 to 8. And from 9th to 12th grade, you really need at least 7 words a day, which easily is taking place with all the subject content work that you do at that time in your schooling. Again, I've added in the same active practice questions here, but I'm now going to add in more sentence stems to expand on these that were mentioned in this book to give you an idea of how you can add in, and I'm just going to go back to these words here, as many of these conjunctions in the high frequency words as you can, as well as your time words, which can be trickier, and prepositions. prepositions can be much harder to learn, because if you go back to this slide here, we know that these location words are learned very early on, and they're assumed knowledge as language before you get to school, but they may need more work. Okay, let's have a look at that. Here is extended prompts using sentence stems for cause and effect. So going back to that question, when might it be difficult to drive in the fog? Here are some 4 examples. It is dangerous to drive in the fog because, okay? So we've got visibility is low. We could say, as a result of fog, what could it mean? Drivers need to slow down. Or due to the thick fog, many accidents can happen, or my flight was cancelled. Or if drivers can't see the road, then, and this whole if then is really helpful. Kids do know if pretty quickly. If it's raining, then we have to stay inside. Some will be happy, some won't. And then here we've got extension task for asking to compare, and the sentence stems are provided. Driving in fog is different from. Even that word from can be quite tricky for students who have language difficulties, and both fog and rain can affect how drivers move, but. So I probably wouldn't do all of these questions using the word fog, but like I mentioned earlier, I've kept the content the same to show you how far you can extend vocabulary by selecting appropriate sentence stems. Again, last one, the fog began to lift when, and here's a model when the sun came out and warmed the air. And again, I've got some prompts for sequence and cause and effect here. Before the sun rose, the fog was thick, but after it rose, it started to disappear. Or as a result of sun warming, the fog lifted. Or first the fog was heavy, then it slowly thinned. And down here with an extension task, you could ask for a summary. In summary, the fog lifted when the sun warmed the air. So none of this would be possible, I think, without planning it first. There's a lot of thought and process that you'd put into how far and how much understanding do I want for a certain word to have the depth it needs to be able to develop vocabulary throughout the curriculum. All right, nearly there. So before we wrap up, I do want to acknowledge the key research as a bit of a summary and review of the frameworks that I've used on the 3 webinars. I did a lot of work on simple view and the reading rope. I did on the second webinar, I really unpacked the simple view of writing, looking at working memory and executive functioning. And I've referred to the writing rope throughout the webinars. And today I brought in the cognitive foundations model. I'd like to finish now by going back to the post-assessment. I'll come back to this slide after the post-assessment. And let's go back and see if we can finish where you think you are now with the smashing of content that I've provided on vocabulary instruction. And I'm sitting on the post-assessment page now. So if you're on the post-assessment page and you've still got your phones there, check in. How do you feel now about being able to design explicit vocabulary lessons? Hopefully the information that I provided gives you more knowledge and understanding of where to go to get it and the value of vocabulary instruction. Thank you. Awesome. And then name one classroom practice that you'll give a go and have a trial of. I forgot to reshare. Let me just go out of this screen for a sec and go back to the sharing page. I just forgot to do that. Let me go back to here. So, there we go. We're looking at implicit vocab. I really liked implicit vocabulary strategies. It's really changed my teaching because it makes me snappier and more pacey. Planning of questions, cause and effect sentence stems, great for middle and upper primary. Thank you. I'm looking at my time, 1 minute to go. Which element of vocabulary instruction do you most want to strengthen? Is it morphology, assessment, or EAL scaffolding, for example? While you're writing this up, all the work I've done on vocabulary this year, I've actually managed to put together a project in ChatGPT, and it will do it for me now. I will just say to it, use this strategy to teach this word, and it just gives me the word in the student context really quickly. It's accelerated and more efficient. It's more efficient teaching assessment. Yeah. Okay. 3 takeaways from this training. I will add, and I didn't add it in because we're running out of time, but Reading Rockets in America, Reading Rockets, if you Google Reading Rockets vocabulary assessment, there's some excellent formative assessment tools that you can use for vocabulary that are great for planning knowledge-rich units or units of inquiry to pre- and post-test assessment. Don't do 3. We're running out of time. Oh, thank you. Oh, look at that. 1 of each. Beautiful. All right. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing that. Pop back and say a final thank you. Portion of my screen. Hopefully this works. And again, I said I would share this page. These are the key books. They are so worth having on your staff room table if you get to the staff room for your lunch break or just in your toolkit. I appreciate your time. It's been an absolute privilege to spend this time with you on these 3 webinars. And there's my reference pages. And if you have any further questions, best way to contact me is probably on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or you can do questions through Nelson. Kate, thank you.
That's it. I'm going to wrap up as well. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Jacinta. We've learned so much, and I was literally just about to say there's a bunch of reference text that need to sit on our bedside tables now. So thank you, and everyone have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you.